بسم الله الرحمن
Well, physically, of course, it's a lot of feeling tired, hungry, and thirsty, especially in the first few days. It's always a big adjustment to move from your normal diet, your normal timetable, and to shift to waking up very early in the morning for sahur. That is the morning meal before the start of the fast. So it's pre dawn. Um, and that just messes with your sleep cycle, and of course you go a long period without drinking water or eating anything, and especially in the first few days it's always something of an adjustment. For me, coffee. Do I decide to get rid of coffee before the start of Ramadan? If I don't, then I need my coffee in the morning, and that means you can't get back to sleep, so you're definitely feeling tired a lot of the day. But you find a rhythm, over the course of the month. And certainly by the second and third week, you have a rhythm and actually start to see the benefits, perhaps, of skipping lunch, that you don't have to waste time eating. You can just do something you want to do. For me, a lot more work and reading. And so forth. But you definitely do feel more tired by the end of the day. And by the third week, I find I start to feel a little lighter, just a little more ethereal, because your body has gotten really used to and adjusted to not eating and drinking nearly as much. Um, and the last 10 days are always very intense, especially if somebody is doing the i'tikaf, that is the seclusion in a mosque where they really don't speak much. They just spend their time contemplating and praying and staying up all night, if possible, maybe 1 or 2 hours of sleep, but doing special night prayers, not only the Taraweeh prayers, but also there's a Tahajjud prayer, which is pre-dawn prayers. So those can be very, very intense, where you're reading a lot more Quran and you're maximizing those last days before Ramadan ends and the blessings that people feel come with it. So they're very intense about that. I would say it also makes one feel a lot more connected as an ummah, that is, as a community of people. You really feel connected to people around the world who are going through the same experience of fasting during this month, and of that kind of a connection, of a shared experience. It also, as I mentioned, gives greater sense of empathy for those who are suffering, and especially for people within the Muslim Ummah who are fasting. And so I have to say that the last year and this year, it's been a very intense time thinking about the people of Gaza in Palestine who are fasting and who are forced into a fast by the brutal siege and blockade of Gaza that has lasted for 20 years, since 2005, essentially, and especially in the last 18 months, and with the renewal 2 weeks ago with a blockade and siege upon Gaza. The scenes have been devastating now with the continued attacks and bombardment. And it's so difficult. You already empathize with these people who are struggling for their freedom from a settler colonial onslaught and genocide, but especially to know that these are people who are committed and dedicated to their religious practices, and they are going through Ramadan. And to know that the beginning of the renewed campaign of utter destruction and bombardment happened early in the morning when people were waking up and gathering together for their pre-dawn meal. Something that, of course, for any Muslim and for any human, but especially for Muslims during Ramadan, is a very painful thought, because you empathize with them. Uh, I would say that the experience of fasting is something that really goes counter to the entire logics, you might say, of consumer capitalism. This is something that all of these religious traditions, regulations against usurious lending, fasting, all the feast days in the Catholic kind of calendar, these things were part of a rhythm of life, of a society and a culture that has to be eviscerated for capitalism to actually achieve its goals of greater and greater productivity and of regulating and changing life, not to be on the rhythms of some kind of seasonal calendar or a religious calendar, but under the dictates and logics of capitalist modes of production. And I think of fasting and of Ramadan as taking a month to remind yourself that life doesn't have to be organized the way it has become around the logics of corporate profits and consumer capitalism. It puts you at odds with it somehow. You consume less, you're less kind of interested in the vain play, the vain entertainments, and trying to focus on things that really matter in your life, those social and human relationships, and for Muslims, of course, their connection with God. Um, and so I think that's actually a healthy thing because it's very difficult to pull yourself out of this all absorbing system and mode of organizing life for capitalist production. If there are some places where you can have a bit of rebellion or a little disorientation of that, I think it's healthy mentally, physically, and spiritually. Um, the last thing I want to say, though, about how it feels to fast is for in a Muslim society, of course, we've been talking about how life can be organized around a collective and shared experience. However, if you're a Muslim living as a religious minority, particularly, say, in the West, um, it can be rather isolating in some ways socially, which is why, of course, the Muslim community means a lot to one another during the period of Ramadan, because so much of social life is gathering around sharing food and drink. It's a wonderful thing. Already observant Muslims, aren't part of drinking culture, which is important, in the worlds of business and especially for young people. I myself remember very much in college that it was an odd thing to never be going to, the bars or things like that, which was just an activity that was informal. And when I've lived in England, pub culture is something that's a core part of social experience with people. It's how you get to know people and forge friendships and business relationships, connections, and so on. So during the fast in particular, you're out of rhythm with the rest of society. And that can be really a challenge, in some ways, much more difficult to be able to fast when you're working a job in a company that is not interested in your reduced productivity, say, or the fact that you're rather tired and maybe not as creative or productive during the day. It's something that stands at odds with the logics of how life is organized. So that's definitely a challenge and a unique component of the experience for Muslims in diasporic culture. But overall, Muslims continue to fast. And I think I would say that more Muslims observe Ramadan and fasting than I would say are regular, say, in prayers, the 5 daily prayers. Very difficult to keep up with those and integrate them in a busy work, school, life situation as a diasporic Muslim in the West, where you don't have mosques on every corner, you don't hear the adhan, the Muslim call to prayer to remind you. You have to generate that discipline yourself. Whereas Ramadan, I think it's for an intense month that many people, even if they're not able to keep up with regular prayers, they find spiritual, religious, physical, and social benefits in observing Ramadan. So it's a very important part of Muslim culture, particularly, I would say, in the diaspora.